Somewhere in a hospital right now, a bag of blood is being wheeled down a hallway toward someone who is running out of time. Nobody knows this patient's name yet. Nobody has had a chance to test what runs through their veins. And yet the staff already know exactly what to give them, because one blood type on the planet is trusted enough to be handed to almost anyone, no questions asked. That blood type is O. And when scientists recently pointed artificial intelligence at millions of genetic records and medical histories to figure out why this one letter behaves the way it does, what came back was not a tidy footnote. It was a story that stretches back further than our species, tangled up with mosquitoes, ancient plagues, and a genetic accident that somehow became the most successful blood type on Earth. Most of us carry our blood type the way we carry our shoe size. It's printed on a card somewhere, mentioned once by a nurse, and then forgotten. A, B, O. 4 letters that seem about as meaningful as eye color. But blood type has never been just a label. It is a description of what is sitting on the surface of your red blood cells, and that surface has been fought over by parasites, bacteria, and viruses for millions of years. Every one of us is walking around wearing the scars of that fight, whether we know it or not. To understand what makes O so strange, you first have to understand what blood type actually is. Red blood cells are studded with tiny molecular markers called antigens, and it's the presence or absence of 2 specific markers, called A and B, that decides which type you are. If your cells carry the A marker, you're type A. If they carry B, you're type B, carry both, and you're AB. But if your cells carry neither marker, if the surface is essentially bare, you are type O. That blankness is not a technicality. It's the entire identity of the type. O is defined by what it lacks. This is exactly why type O blood, especially the negative variant, earned its reputation as the universal donor. Antibodies in a recipient's immune system are trained to attack markers they don't recognize. Give someone the wrong type, and their immune system treats the transfusion like an invasion. But because O red cells have no A or B markers to be recognized as foreign in the first place, they can often be given safely to patients of other blood types in an emergency, when there's no time to test and match. That's why hospitals stockpile O-negative blood specifically for trauma bays, ambulances, and battlefield medicine. It's the blood equivalent of a universal passport, and it has quietly saved an uncountable number of lives. Here's where things get interesting, though, because you'd assume the blank type must be the original setting, the default that existed before evolution added the fancier A and B markers on top. It's actually the reverse. Geneticists tracing the ABO gene back through our history found that the instructions for building the A and B antigens came first. At some point, in some ancestral population, a small mutation broke that gene. The cellular machinery lost the ability to build the marker at all, and the result was a red blood cell with nothing on its surface. Type O isn't the ancient default. It's the mutation. It's what happens when a working system quietly breaks. Normally, a broken gene doesn't have much of a future. It causes problems, or it does nothing useful, and it fades out over a few generations. But that's not what happened here. This broken version spread. It didn't just survive, it thrived, eventually becoming the single most common blood type across the human species. A mutation that started as a loss ended up looking like a winner, and that contradiction is exactly what recent large-scale research has been trying to explain. This is where the scale of modern data analysis changes everything. For most of medical history, understanding blood type meant working with small samples, a few hundred patients here, a research paper there. But when you can run computational analysis across enormous genetic biobanks, cross-referencing blood type with disease outcomes, geography, and ancestry for hundreds of thousands or even millions of people at once, patterns start to surface that would be completely invisible at a smaller scale. That is precisely what has been happening with type O over the last several years, As researchers have combed through population health datasets, using increasingly sophisticated computational tools to look for signals hiding inside the noise. The first place many of these investigations turned was malaria, one of the oldest and deadliest diseases our species has ever faced. For thousands of years, in the tropical regions where malaria has always been most severe, it wasn't a rare misfortune. It was a constant, grinding pressure on entire populations, striking children hardest and returning season after season for generation after generation. Any trait that offered even a small survival edge against it would, over enough time, become more common, simply because the people who had it were more likely to live long enough to have children of their own. When researchers compared health records from historically malaria-heavy regions against places where the disease never took hold, a consistent pattern emerged. People with type O blood who did contract malaria were somewhat less likely, on average, to develop the most severe, life-threatening form of the illness, the kind that clogs small blood vessels and shuts down organs. The proposed mechanism involves something called resetting, where infected red blood cells clump together with healthy ones, choking off blood flow. Cells carrying the A or B antigens appear to form these dangerous clumps more readily. The smooth, marker-free surface of a type O cell seems to resist that clumping. It's important to be precise about what this means. It is not protection, and it's not immunity. People with type O blood catch malaria all the time, and plenty of them get seriously ill. The effect is a modest statistical nudge, visible only when you zoom out across huge populations, the way a faint pattern in sand only becomes visible from far above. But a nudge repeated across thousands of years and millions of lives is enough to bend the shape of a species' genetics, and it lines up strikingly well with the world map of blood type distribution, where type O reaches its highest frequencies in parts of the world where malaria has historically been most brutal, including regions of Central and South America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Malaria wasn't the only thread researchers pulled on. When the same kind of large-scale comparison was applied to blood clotting disorders, another pattern appeared. People with type O tend, on average, to carry somewhat lower levels of certain clotting proteins, including one called von Willebrand factor. Lower levels of this protein are gently associated with a reduced risk of some types of dangerous blood clots, the kind that can travel through the bloodstream and cause a stroke or a blockage in the lungs. Again, this is a whisper in the data, not a guarantee for any individual. Clotting risk is shaped by dozens of factors, including age, activity level, other health conditions, and other genes entirely. Type O is one thread in a very large tapestry, but it is a real thread, and it shows up consistently when you have enough people in the dataset to see it. If type O was simply the lucky blood type, the one advantage stacked on advantage with no downside, evolution would likely have pushed the entire species toward it by now, and the other types would have vanished. They haven't. Type A, B, and AB remain common across the world, which tells us that type O must come with trade-offs of its own. And when researchers went looking for those trade-offs, they found them too. Some large studies have linked type O to a somewhat higher susceptibility to certain stomach ulcers caused by a specific bacterium that appears to bind more easily to the O surface. Other research has suggested that in cholera infections, a violent and historically devastating diarrheal disease, people with type O blood may on average experience more severe symptoms rather than fewer. The same blankness that seems to offer a small shield against one ancient killer may leave the door slightly more open for another. Biology rarely hands out a trait that is purely good news, and type O is no exception. That balance of gains and losses is actually the biggest clue to something even deeper. When scientists compared the genetic code behind blood type across species, they found the same basic system, the presence or absence of these antigens, in chimpanzees, gorillas, and other primates on branches of the evolutionary tree that split off from ours millions of years ago. This is not something that appeared recently in human history. It's an inheritance carried down across an almost unimaginable chain of ancestors. And that raises an obvious evolutionary question. Why hasn't one version won out completely after all this time? Biologists have a name for what's likely happening here: balancing selection. It occurs when no single version of a trait is allowed to fully dominate, because each version carries its own mix of advantages and disadvantages, and the pressures in the environment keep shifting over time and geography. If type O helps against one disease and struggles against another, while type A does roughly the opposite, then depending on which threats a population faces in a given era, the advantage keeps swinging back and forth. A cholera outbreak might quietly disadvantage O carriers for a generation. A wave of malaria might quietly favor them for 10. Over deep time, no type ever fully wins, because the conditions selecting for it never stop shifting either. Your blood type, in that sense, is a snapshot of a negotiation between your ancestors and disease that has been running for millions of years and still hasn't been resolved. Now here's where the story has to take a hard turn toward honesty, because for every genuine finding in this research, there are popular beliefs about blood type that the same data has thoroughly dismantled. You've probably heard the idea that each blood type comes with its own ideal diet, that people with type O should eat like ancient hunters, loading up on meat and protein because that's supposedly what their type was built for. It's a compelling story, because it borrows the language of real evolutionary history. But when researchers actually tested it in controlled studies, checking whether matching a diet to blood type produced any measurable benefit, the effect simply wasn't there. People who followed blood type diets sometimes did feel healthier, but the improvement tracked the diet itself: more vegetables, less processed food, more mindful eating, not the letter on their donor card. When the blood types were shuffled and the diets reassigned, the results held steady. Blood type was doing no work at all. The same fate met the idea that blood type shapes personality, a belief that runs surprisingly deep in parts of the world where type O is sometimes described as the natural leader, the bold and confident type, destined for the front of the pack. As culture, it's a genuinely interesting phenomenon. As science, it has never held up. When researchers looked for a real statistical link between blood type and personality traits across large populations, they found nothing that survived honest scrutiny. No temperament, no destiny hiding in the antigens. The blood itself has no opinion about who you are. So what does this leave us with? Not a diagnosis, not a horoscope, not a meal plan. What it leaves us with is a genuinely rare thing. A piece of trivia that turns out to be real science on one side and popular myth on the other, and modern computational research has been able to draw a much clearer line between the two than ever before. Your blood type is a small, real thread in an enormous genetic and evolutionary weave, one factor among thousands that shape a human life, most of them far louder than this one. It nudges probabilities across entire populations. It does not decide any single person's health, and it certainly doesn't decide their fate. Anyone with real questions about their own risks belongs in a conversation with a doctor who knows their full history, not staring at a single letter trying to read the future in it. But there is something worth sitting with here anyway. That forgettable little mark on a donor card, the thing most of us stop thinking about the moment we leave the clinic, is actually one of the oldest ongoing experiments in biology, written into nearly every human body on the planet. It reaches back past written history, past agriculture, past our own species, into a negotiation with disease that began before humans had faces to lose, and it hasn't finished yet. It won't tell you who you are. But it tells you, in a language far older than any story we've invented to explain it, where you came from. So now I want to know, do you know your blood type? And be honest, have you ever believed one of the myths? Did you try eating for your type, or grow up somewhere that read personality into it? Or did you just assume O meant nothing more than a line on a donor card? Tell me your type and the belief you let go of down in the comments, because it turns out there's a whole hidden history written into the human body, and we're only just beginning to read it.